Okay, so I see that our numbers are going up and people are starting to join us. Once again, thank you so much for joining us for the first day of this roundtable series, Community Collaboration for Economic Inclusion. Just a few quick housekeeping tips to ensure that you're successful in participating in today's webinar. To begin, this webinar will be recorded and provided to you within a week, and it will also be posted to our Prosperity Now YouTube channel within a few days from today's session. You are muted, but please ask questions using the questions box. As you see on your screen, it's right there on your control panel. And if you have any issues at all with the platform, please email gotomeeting@prosperitynow.org. We want you all to get super, super cozy for today's webinar. We have a lot of great speakers here to share some amazing information. So please follow these tips to get the most out of today's webinar. So of course, join from a quiet place, grab a coffee or snack, and settle in, kick back for this great content that we have coming. Please engage. So again, send us questions and comments, and also use the chat, talk to one another and do some networking. And lastly, reflect on ways to apply what you learn to your own work. Everything that we do here at Prosperity Now, we try to make as applicable as possible. So start thinking about your work and your world and your community as we continue with today's webinar. Without further ado, I am going to pass it to Madeline Santana, and she'll get us all started for today.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you everyone for joining today for this Building Up Black-Led CDFIs roundtable event. So we're super happy and excited to center this discussion around effective cross-sector collaboration that'll help address the racial wealth divide. So as Olivia mentioned, my name is Madeline Santana. I am the program manager on the racial economic equity team, or economic justice team, excuse me, at Prosperity Now. And our role here at the organization is to bring expertise, promising practices, and strategies, applying a racial economic equity lens to be in partnership and support of our BIPOC leaders and help them advance racial economic equity and mobility for their communities. And so our team provides socioeconomic tailored capacity building and technical assistance backed by local and national data, and that's intended to help, catalyze leadership, organizational management, service delivery, and ultimately help drive community level interventions that help bring forth economic and wealth equity analysis to the field. And so today, our summit session is part of a larger initiative, part of the Building High Impact CDFIs of Color project in partnership with Kaiser and AAA, African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs, both of whom will be speaking shortly about this collaboration and why they're uplifting this work. But first, I do want to highlight our cohort organizations who've been participating in this program for about 2 years. So just want to give them a shout out. So these members include Impact Business Capital out of California, African Economic Development Solutions out of St. Paul, Minnesota, Albany Community Together out of Georgia, Baltimore Community Lending, Beaufort County Black Chamber of Commerce in South Carolina, BBIF Black Business Investment Fund in Orlando, Florida, Community First Lending out of California, Greater Cincinnati Micro Enterprise Initiative out of Ohio, Harlem Entrepreneurial Fund out of New York, and lastly, Pacific Coast Regional Small Business Development Corp out of California as well. So these organizations have been helping sort of shape these roundtables over the next few days, highlighting sort of the most pressing challenges and bringing forth some awesome speakers who can talk to some of the solutions that they've been working through to address them. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Linwood Long Sr., President and CEO of AAA, and followed by Rachel Meyer, who is going to speak from Kaiser's partnership and support of the work that we're doing here at Prosperity Now. So Mr. Linwood, I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Madeline. What an introduction. But first, before I even tell you who I am, I just have to be so thrilled and give a shout out to those great members of the Alliance that you listed, all the way from Florida down up around Cincinnati into California. Again, my name is Linwood Long. I'm the CEO of the African American Alliance of CDFI CEOs. And what a great collaboration and partnership. And we have to thank Kaiser for their support that allowed Prosperity Now to literally, and I want you to hear this, to literally be the wings, the wind beneath the wings. In fact, we're the wings to help us glide as we move through our initial formation. If it had not been for that partnership and that support, I just cannot fathom to think how we would have made it. I'm talking about from administrative support that allowed us to get basic. You know, in order to move an organization, you got to have the basic. From communication to emails. I mean, literally, we started out with not even with email, and it was through Prosperity Now that helped guide us through that whole process, hooked us up with Microsoft and their package, and all of this obviously came from this partnership and funding they had with Kaiser, and we are delighted for that. Let's tick off a couple things. Building high impact of CDFIs of color, capacity building, amazing work. And all those organizations that were listed will be change agent, fueled by that great support. And then policy work. My goodness, we're working now with expanding Black business credit to look at how do we bring the Alliance and their work together to have impact in the work that the Alliance is doing and EBBC in addressing the racial wealth gap. And I must confess, when you think about the Alliance, when we started out, we were about 31 members when Prosperity came. Now, through that effort, we are 70 members, and we'll say we're the only organization, the only one that focuses upon building the capacity and building bridges and building power, not institutional power, but policy development of Black-led CDFIs to impact Black and Brown communities that they serve. So we talked about capacity building, we talked about policy, but also been partnership in a program they have with Wells Fargo, where several of our members are lenders, helping them to move capital out. Capacity is one thing, but capital is another. And when you bring those two things together, I think it is very important. And finally, I want to say that we messaging, right? And so Prosperity Now is there with us, helping us to frame our newsletter. And so when you look at all together, you wrap that package, the gift to us was Prosperity Now with the funding from Kaiser. I don't know how to frame it any better. And I want to thank you, Rachel, as you come on. I want to personally thank you for help Prosperity Now to be that wing. I say that wing, not the wind, but that wing that helped us to get the wing that we could soar. Thank you so much.
You're muted, Rachel.
Oh, thank you. I think I was muted in two places. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lenwood. And we're so proud and grateful to have been able to support the Alliance and Prosperity Now. And we're so impressed by the amazing leadership that you all have shared, and excited to see all what comes in the future. And I think there may be people on the phone wondering, well, maybe who is Kaiser Permanente, but also if you know who Kaiser Permanente is, we're the largest integrated health system in the United States. You may be wondering, why is Kaiser Permanente supporting this particular issue? And so I just want to share a little bit about that. And I think at its most basic, financial security is at the core of nearly everything that drives health. Health is wealth. Wealth is health, both directions. Finances determine access to healthcare and insurance, food security, housing security, access to education beginning in early childhood. Your finances determine where you can afford to live, the conditions of your housing, and how you weather unexpected circumstances or natural disasters. In many ways, economic opportunity is a super driver of health, a super determinant of health, we say. It's the kind of upstream issue that has a tremendous effect on every other social factor that influences health outcomes. And we know that only about 30% of health outcomes are a result of genetics and access to clinical care. The other 70% are behavioral choices that people make and the socioeconomic conditions in which people live. And so we have to support these issues because economic disparity is stark in this country, and it's perpetuated through systemic injustices and discrimination. And CDFIs are really at the heart of addressing those disparities. And and in particular, Black-led CDFIs and Black-serving CDFIs are at the center of addressing that disparity for the Black community. And so we were so impressed by the leadership of Lenwood and his board and the founding members, and we were very convinced of the need for that institution and the role that Prosperity Now could play in helping be that wind. And we couldn't be more delighted with where the alliance is now and what the members are achieving and continuing to achieve. So we're so proud to be here today and to support this conversation and to support the broader work, and looking forward to hearing from the panelists. So back to you, Madeline, and thank you to you, Lenwood, and Gary over at Prosperity Now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ebony White, Director of the Racial Economic Justice Team at Prosperity Now. I also just want to take the time to thank both Kaiser and the African American Alliance for your partnership. Not only has it been instrumental for both of you guys, but it has definitely been instrumental for us as we continue to figure out just the best ways of how we can support BIPOC-led CDFIs in the sector. So it's been a joy, and I'm sure we will continue to do some good work with each other. What I'm going to do today is to talk about the state of racial economic equity in households of color. I'm going to talk about it first from looking at it across the U.S., and then I'm going to go just a little bit deeper into some of the cities of our cohort members. And so we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of the things that we know is that economic inequality has expanded over the past few years due to the COVID-19 pandemic, diminishing stability and opportunity for millions of Americans, especially for those of color. And in communities of color, the growing racial economic disparities has manifest through structural, systemic, and institutional factors that drive health and income inequities for those who are already struggling. And the median income for households of color is only 3/4 of the median income for white households. And due to the fact that households of color in the US has been historically excluded from resources provided by traditional financial institutions, they have less access to assets and wealth building resources compared to our white households. And additionally, households of color experience high rates of liquid asset poverty at 53% for Black households and 56% for Latino households, compared to 29% for white households. Nationally, most of the wealth for middle-class families, they come from homeownership. And Black and Latino households own their homes at 41% and 47% compared to the rate of white households at 72%. And additionally, we know actually all too well that entrepreneurs of color has less access to resources that can help build their businesses, like the Paycheck Protection Program loan and other types of capital compared to their counterparts, making it just really difficult for these businesses to survive any type of economic instability. And there are many economic hurdles that exist for entrepreneurs and small businesses of color as they experience issues with credit, startup capital, business stabilization, and scalability due to the lack of access to capital, education, and markets. And the pandemic's disproportionate impact on these businesses have forced some of them to close their doors, unfortunately, and while others are still grappling to reach some stability and growth. As a result, only 20% of businesses in the US are owned by people of color. And this is a gap that CDFIs feel and a key strategies to shifting this reality. We all know that homeownership is a wealth building avenue for many middle class families in the United States with a high potential for upward mobility and economic stability. But however, the gap between home ownership for households of color and white home ownership has just remained persistent throughout the decades. And so with the home ownership rate for households of color being 2/3 of that for white households, there's definitely a lot of work for us to do in this space. We also see that households of color in the US, they experience some financial insecurities when they do even own their own homes, being more likely to be cost burdened and also asset poor. They experience things such as higher mortgage rates. They spend more on mortgage insurance. They may typically spend more on property taxes due to still some of the things that's happened around segregations. And all of these help to impact the high homeownership cost burden rates that we see in our communities. Next slide, please. Now I want to just talk a little bit around the Building High Impact CDFIs of Color, which is definitely a program that's dear to me. We have been working in the space of building high impact nonprofits and CDFIs since 2016 on our team. And so this particular cohort is comprised of, as we know, 10 Black-led CDFIs across 10 different cities. So this definitely was I'll say a bit of a challenge for our team to work across 10 different cities because they all have different, but there's definitely themes that show up when it comes to economic disparities. You know, each community have different historical reasons for why they are still experiencing a lot of the racial wealth gaps that they are seeing in their communities today. They are small to medium-sized CDFIs that are responding to a variety of issues and disparities within their communities. And in these two slides, because it's two slides I'm going to show you real quickly, I just want to give you a little insight into how they are showing up locally in their communities. So no matter the size and location of their city, one thing that was apparent is that the gap that exists when looking at business values across race and ethnicity, without the exception of New York. And despite, you know, in New York, the business values being the same for households of color and white households, when you actually drill down and look at actually who's owning businesses, you see that actually only 27% are owned by people of color. So there's still some disparities, and don't let the data trick you. You need to understand all of the data that's impacting these numbers. Another city I just want to call attention to is Cincinnati, Ohio, where it's only 8% of businesses that are owned by people of color. Like, this is something that is definitely impacting the wealth gaps that we are seeing in communities of color. Next slide, please. St. Paul is a good example of how I'll say households of color have a long way to go in bridging the gap of homeownership with the rate of half that of white households. And so the COVID-19 pandemic, we know it will have a lasting effect on the socioeconomic equity of communities of color. And it's just deepening the need for viable, long-term, cross-sector, authentic collaborations and solutions that create the economic mobility and wealth building opportunities that we know our communities need. Black and Brown-led CDFIs have consistently operated at the front lines of economic upheaval, unlike traditional banking institutions, by helping to support communities of color through extreme times of financial crisis. Therefore, investing and partnering with our Black and Brown-led CDFIs will also support homeownership, employment, wealth building, health equity, and financial security for all communities of color. Black and Brown-led CDFIs can create changes and also the cultural welfare of communities of color because they have deep ties, deep relationships that ultimately can help shift their overall quality of living for their clients. And this shift in quality of living can really help to decrease the racial wealth divide and create some economic prosperity within these communities. So I ask that you keep these key points in mind as we move into our panel discussion. I would like to welcome one of our cohort members, Brian Kennedy Jr. with APAC Business Capital. And I also just want to thank you for taking the time, as we just want to make sure that we are grounding this conversation in the data and the disparities that are existing, and not only in communities of color, but the institutions that are serving them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ebony. It is such an honor to be here, and truly, more than anything, an honor to be a part of this work. We really are on the front lines of serving communities of color with capital, coaching, and community. And so what we'll be starting with is a framing of our conversation today so that we can have an understanding of where we're aiming to go. In unpacking the challenges of effective collaboration for CDFIs, we'll aim to frame this conversation through a three-pronged approach. The first approach will be capital, how CDFIs are considered. We know that CDFIs are capital and lending institutions, but how are CDFIs considered in federal, state, and local funding initiatives is of great importance in this pandemic recovery period. We want to be a part of the conversation beyond the payroll protection program, where we saw CDFIs have national impact in serving the underserved communities. The second prong of this approach is coaching, resources, and partnerships. We know a lot of small businesses, especially business owners of color, do not have the same wherewithal or business acumen that more experienced and more well-resourced business owners do. And so the question along the lines of how do we currently create TA programs for business owners, TA being technical assistance or coaching and consulting, how do we leverage current consulting, mentoring, and technical assistance partnerships? And lastly, we want to ensure that we leave no stone unturned in how we do this work in a uniform fashion to be able to serve business owners across business types and sizes in our various communities. The last prong of the approach is the role of CDFIs in being community development cohesive change agents. How can we centralize what we see in our data collection and lending and technical assistance to better share information about clients and business owners to each other as partners? How do we better do this work in a communal way? And so we'll be looking to understand, how can we centralize data? How can we replicate something like a FAFSA coming from the education industry to really do this work in a way that can be scalable and intentional in all of our communities? We will be talking about the role of CDFIs in helping closing the racial wealth divide, as we've heard a little bit of. What relationships or line of sights do CDFIs have that make them crucial to their respective communities, and as a direct conduit to communities looking for the support needed, understanding that we are that conduit from both sides of the equation? And how do we leverage the different levels of public, one side of the conversation, and private partnership? This will be a question we aim in on during the conversation. From the public side, what cities, what counties, what state programs can we take advantage of? What federal programs? From the private side, as a lending entity, how do we leverage our banking relationships? How do we leverage the foundations we work with and the other private entities that help fund the work that we do? We know that CDFIs have a deep investment in community, which does include trust. It includes strong relationships, and it includes dedication to low-income individuals, particularly communities of color. Now the conversation here needs to shift to how do we leverage this influence to generate capacity building for our organizations and expand our relationships with the community and with those who support the community. We will be discussing what are CDFIs seeing in their communities, what are the barriers CDFIs are facing in authentically and strategically collaborating across sectors. What are some of the examples of how we are arguing for dollars for this capacity building to better expand this work? And how are people being brought into the community for program development. We want to make sure that as we're shaping these programs, as we're building these systems, that we are bringing the business owners who will be directly impacted into those conversations. And lastly, how do we scale them? So we have a lot of good conversation topics on the deck today. We are very excited for our conversation. Thank you, and looking forward to it.
And I will go ahead and introduce our panel speakers for this discussion right now. We have David McGee with Build Well Minnesota. He's going to be moderating this session. We also have Misha Josephy, who is with the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, along with his colleague, Johan Matthews. We have Kathleen Edward Mons from Center for Educational Opportunity, and then Norali Sands, who is with Making Hope Happen Foundation. So thank you all for joining, and I'll turn it over to you, David.
Thank you, Madeline. That was a good introduction from Brian. Like we got a full plate of food that we need to unpack and get into. So we're going to get started this afternoon. We have Misha Josephy, Catalina Edward Mounds, Norley Saints, and Johan Matthews is going to be helping us today with our discussion. I'm just gonna open up with a question to all of you. I don't know who wants to go first, but can you just tell everyone a little bit about who you are, your connection to CDFIs, and your initial thoughts on the remark and framing that Brian has given us? Start with you, Kathleen.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Thank you to the entire team at Prosperity Now, and certainly the support for AAA and as well as the Kaiser organization for being a part of today. My name is Catalina Mons. I am a professor here at Albany State University in Albany, Georgia, one of the rural places on the planet. And we're about 3 hours south of Atlanta, and we serve approximately 27 counties in rural America. What we call and what the research denotes as a persistently poor area. And so to your point, Ebony, I love your opening comments as it pertains to the questions around poverty and the role of CDFIs. And my role as founding director here at Albany State is to work with one of the CDFIs that's a part of your alliance, the Albany Community Together organization. And our aim as well is to help to remove barriers so that people can really live fulfilled lives. And we do that through a host, through education, housing, research, and programming. And my initial thoughts on the question that's being posed is that I think it's important that higher education, particularly HBCUs, really become a stronger partner. It's really an untapped market for CDFIs to find not only students who are entrepreneurial on their journey, as well as faculty who could certainly serve as subject matter experts and researchers in providing the support that CDFIs might need as they are moving through the ecosystem. And so again, thank you for the invitation.
Did you want to jump in, Johan?
Sure. Hey, everybody, peace. My name is Johan Matthews. I work with the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, and my relationship with CDFIs, or Community Development Financial Institution, kind of spanned the last 7 or so years. I've worked with a variety of CDFIs. Where I live in upstate New York, which is also called Albany, New York, and with other funds that have specific focuses, like the Black Farmer Fund and other types of CDFIs or community development financial institutions. So I come into this work recognizing the value of CDFIs, and I'm excited to work with Mika and the rest of the team, CFNE, to facilitate capacity building and capital access for folks who are trying to access funds and information around creating cooperative enterprises, which I see as a very valuable enterprise.
Thank you. Norali.
Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Norali Sands. I am Program Coordinator for Uplift San Bernardino. We are a collective impact program of the Making Hope Happen Foundation. Our mission is really building a generation of successful adults who are committed to growing roots in the city of San Bernardino. As far as my connection to CDFIs, as part of the small business resource group, they play a vital role in helping with access to capital for our entrepreneurs and small businesses in our community. And so we recognize and highlight the value of the work that they do in our communities by investing, right, and taking risks that other financial institutions wouldn't do. But because they're based in our community and they're for our community, they really bring a chance for our families to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. And Misha, that leaves you as last but not least.
Thank you so much, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Micha Josefi, Executive Director of the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. I work with Johan. It's great to work with Johan. CFNE is a 47-year-old CDFI serving cooperatives in the Northeast. I first connected with CFNE as a borrower, having developed an affordable housing co-op and needing to access mortgage financing to acquire the property. After a few years, I joined staff, mostly on the capitalization side. And then after 9 years in that role, I was promoted to executive director 3 years ago. So CFNE is one of a handful of CDFIs that are focused on financing cooperatives, which are enterprises democratically controlled by their core stakeholders, which we think of as their workers, their customers, or their suppliers. So 30 to 40% of our portfolio is invested in worker-owned cooperatives, another 30 to 40% in community-owned grocery stores, and then the rest, roughly 20%, is in housing co-ops of various models. So we see co-ops as both uniquely powerful in general and relevant to this conversation because they create shared economic power for people who are challenged, who are struggling to access individual economic power. And so, that manifests in shared ownership of affordable housing, shared ownership of businesses by the workers, so being your own boss, or ensuring that you and your neighbors can access healthy food. So very excited to be here.
Well, thank you all. And we're even on the moderator. We're 11-year-old CDFI here in Minnesota, and we are focusing primarily on housing and home ownership. And whether you knew it, Minnesota is one of the richest states in the nation, but we have the worst disparities near the top of the list, and as it relates to the disparity in home ownership between Black families and white families here. So we wanted to jump into the next question, and I guess this is for everyone, but I know the question came up about collaboration and the need and the possibilities to collaborate. What are some of the challenges you're facing in attempting to get into collaboration in this field? And what about, is there any cross sectors or anything that could strengthen your ability as a CDFI in this area? Let's talk about collaboration and any challenges, and we'll start with you, Johan.
With me?
Yes.
Yep, gotcha. Yeah, I would say during the time that I've been engaged in this work, I've considered myself a collaborator with the institutions that I ended up either being on staff or contract with. And generally speaking, you're hoping for shared interests, right? So they're interested in bringing resources to communities I'm interested in serving or communities I'm a part of. And so our shared interests should drive that conversation. However, sometimes the interest isn't fully considered, right? I would say, for example, for Black people in the CDFI industry, we've referred to serving non-white people as minorities, right? And so once you're getting into serving minorities and not Black people, you might not have a customized strategy to effectively speak to and be in relationship with those communities. And so you want to make sure you collaborate with people who explicitly are interested in what you're interested in, who can speak that language and can put up the resources to, actually effectively respond to those specific challenges, and not a generalized strategy for non-white people like minorities or BIPOC. You want to be able to collaborate with each other based on a specific audience, responding to specific challenges. So that's one, and I'm sure many will come up.
Thank you. And Misha, I guess you do a lot with, you were talking about cooperatives. And so I would imagine that you have to be entangled in some type of collaboration. So what are your thoughts about the possible challenges that are you're faced with in collaborating?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're deeply enmeshed in an ecosystem of co-op developers, some of whom get funding from the USDA, some of whom are more urban focused and don't have access to that federal funding. And I think one of the big challenges that I see is sort of being on a peer level resource-wise. As a loan fund, our largest tool is debt, which is really powerful in a lot of circumstances, but it's certainly inappropriate in many other circumstances when often what's needed is grant funding, either for very early stage enterprise development or ecosystem building with partners. So, we have worked with public and private partners to bring more resources into the ecosystem, but being able to open those floodgates and access that type of capital at an appropriate level is certainly a big challenge that we face and sort of a bottleneck in our work.
Norley, I want to pronounce your name right. Is it Norley or Norley?
It's Norley. It rhymes with Sarah Lee.
Okay, Norley. So I same question I posed to you. What are some of the challenges of collaboration?
And while collaboration increases our capacity when we come together, as we move forward and extending our services to other neighborhoods, we still see that limitation in our capacity to help more, right? And I think when it's across this, the different sectors, what we see is the challenge of overcoming a scarcity mentality, right? Us coming together and make larger asks for the region, for our region, that is inland Southern California. Our neighbors are Los Angeles. So, and then, we're also competing with Northern California. And so I think sometimes we get caught in that and we don't ask for as much as we need. And so really that has become a challenge to really come together as a region across the different sectors and really ask for what our community needs to move our work forward.
Well, thank you. Kathleen, I know you have a whole bunch of say in this area, being in the field that you're in as a doctor. And I know that there's got to be a lot of cross sector opportunities for collaboration. Do you see a lot of challenges in CDFIs collaborating with one another to bring about the greatest impact for our communities?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And while what I would like to do is speak to the question of the ways in which CDFIs can collaborate with higher institutions. And there are three things that kind of come to mind. One is access to grants, because when higher education institutions, particularly HBCUs, have access to grant dollars, then we in turn can partner with CDFIs in a broader way so that we can help to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem overall. I think that's one. The other challenge that I've seen is really this question of legitimacy, right? So I'm sure that there's a question of legitimacy in terms of our business owners, our product and service providers that we support through CDFI funds, but it's also this question of legitimacy in terms of the role of HBCUs in helping to be a strong partner. So for example, a few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of speaking with Georgia State senators here around the exact question that you just asked, in what ways can HBCUs support innovation and technology? And the reality is, in all of our best efforts to develop the next best designer of the greatest product or service, it's really no match to an environment where we have to still convince consumers that these products and services are of high quality. In like manner, we also have to do that work in terms of HBCUs. And we've really provided past performance and what we can do. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of challenges is really this question of legacy. I think that while I can't answer the question around why some would-be consumers will not purchase goods and services from Black-owned businesses because of the issues of racial systemic racism in our country, what I can say is that CDFIs are really turning out some amazing entrepreneurs in our space, and what we have to do is really help to the broader audience understand our ability to do more with less, but more importantly, the many more things that we could do if we had access to more dollars. And I'll leave you, the audience, with one researcher by the name of Dr. Lisa Cook. She's an economist, has really done quite a bit of research on how racism stifles innovation, and I think that that's worth reading. Thank you.
You're welcome. This one is specifically for Norley and you, Catalina. We'll come back to both of you, but the question is, have you identified any people that are leading the charge around strategic collaboration in your field that's connected to economic mobility? And I guess how, if so, how have you found trusted partners that represent your mission specifically? That's a loaded question, but Norley?
Yes, so initially our connection to the CDFIs was through the Micro Enterprise Collaborative of Inland Southern California. They are a pioneer in this collaboration of cross-sectors supporting small businesses in our area. And so that was the initial introduction. As we have continued to move forward with the work, our ability to connect with other partners, I think really is one, that the law of natural attraction, right? As we work, you come across other partners, and having monthly meetings where we discuss where current programs, projects of each of our partners, we all become in tune with what everybody else is doing in these shared goals. And so I learn about what this particular program is doing, and I may know someone who can come in and connect with you to move that work forward. Our doors are open to the community. So it's not just, organizations through our service providers or micro lenders. It's open to the community. We had a meeting yesterday where we had, he is an externship program coordinator for an entrepreneurial high school in our area. And so he was able to connect, hey, this is what they are doing, and this is what I'm doing, and we come together, right? And so we wouldn't normally, CDFI might not necessarily, the larger ones or even the smaller ones might not have access to these, to learning about what's happening in the community if it wasn't that we have agreed to come together, work together, and share what we're doing. And so this matrix that we've created of connection, collaboration, speaks, right, this opportunity to connect with partners who are doing similar things. So while we may not initially know of each other, as we continue to work, we bring other partners. And sometimes the partners don't necessarily connect to the bigger, like for example, if we're working with CDFIs and we're working with, we're focusing on doing access to capital workshops. But in connecting with that, smaller projects come about and smaller connections in different projects, and then later those can come in. So it's really this incoming and flowing of partnerships with this shared goal of really bringing what you do best to the table and even learning from others. But I think it's this constant collaboration, sharing, really committing, right, to once a month coming in for 1 hour and really moving the needle forward in these shared goals that we agreed upon, and really, touching base with what everybody is doing. So as we do that, it gains trust. We are knowledgeable of the different programs, and if you allow me, I have a example of this we had a small business within our city boundaries. They were thriving prior to the pandemic. After, of course, the pandemic, they had to pivot, and they relied on payday loans to really stay afloat. And because we are in touch with our different organizations, our CDFIs, we know, right, of a particular program that one of our partners offers, that we were able to make that connection, that loan that was burdensome to this small business became financed. And now, that story has changed for that small business. But that connection was able to be made. And 2 weeks, I think within 2 weeks, that story was changed because we were aware of what each other are doing. And so that connection is made, it clicks. I know that you are doing this, so let me connect you to this person. And so that really, I think, is in a nutshell, is how we're able to move this work forward to bring in new partners and really satisfy to the best of our abilities the needs of our community.
And Catalina, I know that I just want to, have you found any trusted advisors, the trusted partners that could represent just specifically your mission as an organization?
Sure. And one of the things I wanted to say to Norley, and thank you for bringing in this concept of bridging town and gown. I know you mentioned that your organization is partnered with high schools and the like. I think it's important that we recognize that when you start thinking about building an ecosystem or a strategy around collaboration, that you can find talent in the most unusual places. And so our partner, our North Star and our go-to really in the Albany community has been through the work of Dr. Thelma Adams Johnson, who, as many of you know, launched Albany Community Together in 2002, merely 2 years after I showed up here at Albany State. And one of the things that we've come to realize in terms of, in identifying the people, but what's the glue that keeps us connected? One is this notion of kind of creating a win-win for both organizations so that we can support the broader community. In rural Georgia, when you start talking about businesses and the need to access financial capital to start those businesses, it is very germane because we live in a town where oftentimes you may not have a high quality provider of said product or service. And so having Black-owned businesses, having businesses that are supported through the CDFI funds is critical, not only to the launch of those businesses, but certainly to the services that they provide to help communities thrive. And then in addition, I think it's important that we leverage partners in a way that allow each organization, as I mentioned, to share their comparative advantage and certainly provide this kind of intellectual space to learn, to grow, and to build businesses.
All right, thank you. This next question is really for Johan and Misha. Brian had mentioned technical assistance, and now we're getting into, I know we're, as CDFIs, we're lenders and we're so many things, and we're trying to do developmental services and developmental financial products. We want to talk about the actual technical assistance. What have you been able to do to make your technical assistance more broadly, accessible to communities and the clients and constituents you serve?
Yeah, I can start. I think technical assistance needs to be firmly grounded in the fact that it's a service. And what does that mean? And I think a lot of the times we're not providing a full, clear, comprehensive service because we just haven't thought about it that much, right? If we thought about it, we might think that people have different levels of familiarity with services, and services are co-produced by the people who are benefiting from them, as well as the people who are providing them. And so when you start thinking about these services being co-produced and there are different levels of familiarity with the service, you can design for that. At Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, we're thinking about service delivery of technical assistance along organizational stage. So we have folks who are, like myself, who might be focused on emerging cooperatives, right? And that'll intersect a few different considerations, right? It'll consider where they are in their organizational journey. It'll also consider some demographic concerns as who's getting into the co-op game right now. And then we have folks looking at the existing cooperators. So we're looking at the different levels of familiarity with the service and designing with that in mind, right? So that's a big piece. Another piece would be the provider, right? Does your service provider relate to the people you're trying to serve, right? In my partnership with the Cooperative for the Northeast, I'm a good service provider because I understand what the people are dealing with, not just because of my skin color, but because I'm in community with them, right? And I can recognize the conditions that we share across the Northeast. And so I can embody that empathy. and I can actually understand it and serve them. So you have those two basic considerations. Another thing is considering the ecosystem, as Dr. Bonds was saying earlier. We're thinking about, who are all the service providers interested in the clients that you're interested in serving or in that field, right? So in our case, who are all the co-op interested service providers within the various communities we're trying to serve, right? So we're looking at an ecosystem approach. And where there are gaps in our service, we partner, right? We form relationships. And so you have to be able to call on a friend from a business capital perspective to help to serve your clients. You also want to think about what's missing in your ecosystem that you or a partner is not providing. And one of the more innovative things we're doing along that side is this co-op navigator fellowship. This is a 3-year fellowship that we've launched to address the lack of available culturally competent co-op development support. So technical assistance to create co-ops. And so in doing so, we're looking at these various ecosystems across the Northeast, and we're partnering with existing economic development organizations who may be interested in serving co-ops, but they don't have that person. And so we've partnered with them to find a fellow from that community, a local co-op interested entrepreneur or organizer, and we're partnering with them and that organization for 3 years, equipping them with the skills and the connections they need to serve people from their community. So those are two big things, right? The actual service within the context of the organization and the ecosystem of service providers and what's their capacity. How do you support those two things? And the last thing I'll say is the people themselves. People are very capable, and sometimes we condition them to not be or present themselves as capable. And if you can involve the people in their own solutions, they will support it. And so we have a range of strategies that we're playing with that try to do that, right? So how are you involving people in the solution, right? Because people will support what they help create. That's an adage from the great game of business, but it's true. All right.
Well, Misha, so I guess I want to add the same question, about the technical assistance. How do you make it more accessible to clients? I just want to add a twist to that as well. How do you do a soft handoff and you're doing cooperatives and not lose a client and still remain and maintain the status of a trusted advisor in this work?
Yeah, I mean, Johan is on the front lines of TA, so he could probably talk about the tactics in that more deeply. I think the one thing that I would add just about our approach to technical assistance is we're a 13-person shop just as of Tuesday, right? Monday we were 12, and we're covering a 7-state region. So we are really trying to think strategically around where's the highest value that we can bring. And that's why we're so focused on partnerships, sort of the pipeline of partners and the pipeline of community developers, and how can we support that pipeline, not just the pipeline of borrowers and clients.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna move it over to you, Catalina. I got a question here about how can we better leverage CDFIs as fiscal agents to probably fulfill greater economic development needs for maybe those up and coming 501c3s and or CDFIs?
Oh, that's a good question. So one of the things that just comes to mind as you raise a question is really, in what ways can we, let me give an example. One of the things that I see as kind of a precursor to having your own business, right, is not only having access to capital, having an idea, being passionate about something, but certainly having the skills and the skill set to be successful. But I think a precursor to that success is also having an understanding of budgeting and financial literacy. And so while it may sound premature, I do think it's important that we try to continue to nurture, to educate, to mentor would-be entrepreneurs around the importance of money management. Because certainly as would-be entrepreneurs start looking and understanding credit scores and their financial history, I think that those certainly become important to know, and also kind of sets the landscape. So that's just one thought. The other thought, and forgive me, I may not be addressing your question properly, as I think about the future and ways in which CDFIs can be supportive and contribute to businesses, is also just this thought around, and I'm sure you already have it, is integrating some CDFI alums, if you will, in the conversation. Those who recipients of the dollars and have successful businesses can come back themselves and contribute either financially or certainly through their talent.
Okay. Yeah, we're in a sea of some really large CDFIs here in Minnesota with, Community Reinvestment Fund and some others that are much more seasoned. Most of them have decades under their belt and multi-$10 million budgets. But Norley, I'm going to go the same question with you. How can we better leverage support of those CDFIs and/or us as CDFIs to probably help some pretty effective CDFIs that are out there that are doing great work, getting good impact, but are not always the ones that get the resources. Some of the larger CDFIs, like whenever the fund issues out a CDFI, a lot of the larger CDFIs take the biggest piece of the pie here in Minnesota, and some smaller CDFIs that really have great outcomes and very impactful to the community are left with very little.
Yes, and so thank you for that question. I think advocating, right, as partners of CDFIs, it's advocating for them when these projects come up, right, letting them know, hey, and because of collaboration, we are more intimately aware of how they work and how they function. So it's not just detailing and advocating for them. This is the work they do. This is how they've done it in the past. This is why they are a good fit for this project. But I think also the proper compensation, right? I think oftentimes we want them to do a lot with very little. And so it's advocating and letting them know they're great at what they do, but they need to be properly funded, right? And so this is why this particular CDFI would be a great fit for this project, right? And these trusted relationships would allow us to do that, right? Because I've worked close with them. This is what they've done. They've proven themselves. And, so it's detailing the work that they've done. It's advocating for their participation in this project, and also allowing the other partners to know they need to be properly funded. So don't expect for them to do this great work and then not give them the appropriate funds to do so. So I think it's important that we all bring it to their attention, not only make them aware that they exist, the quality of their work, but the funding that is needed for them to continue to offer this work and expand. So I think that is crucial to on our part, right, to really help advocate for our CDFIs.
Well, that's great. I was just so impressed. We had participated in building high impact nonprofits of color here, and we had some really great coaching to really help us understand. And sometimes we get conditioned into who we're not, so to speak, when we're always competing for funding and we're always going through the process of trying to get funding for our operations and the things that we do. We kind of get lost in the shuffle. But outside of lending, anyone can jump in on this. How can CDFIs start showcasing all that they have? I mean, this is going right to where you were, Norley. How can these CDFIs really showcase what they do and their impacts when they're small and they don't have a communications person and they're just not big enough to spend as much time in that area to showcase their work? Are there any suggestions? Anybody on the panel?
I can share what we do with the Small Business Resource Group, right? So they are in our group, the micro lending partners. We have, aside from the monthly meetings that I described earlier, we have a radio show, right, where we feature them, we bring them on board. Oftentimes they bring a small business that they've worked with, right, and how this in their case, how this has benefited them. So, right, so then others learn of the work they do and that personal impact that it had on that one small business and what they can do for others. We also leverage social media, right? So other partners learn about them, right? Sometimes they have a very niche project. And so reaching that specific targeted community, like you mentioned, they might not have the funds to do that direct marketing, but if we know about it, we can share, right? Again, this is that collaborative spirit of, if I know about you, let me tell others, right? And as we move in the different sectors, whether it's education, you know, we partner with the Family Engagement Center. And so with them, we bring workshops, right? Hey, are you interested in starting your own, your small business, right? Oftentimes they're not as lendable, you know, through the other financial institutions, but the CDFIs have programs that will benefit them, right? They do smaller loans. And so we're able to bring them to the forefront and let parents in our district know, hey, this is what's happening. And if this is an interest you have, you know, come join us, learn about them, or share it with someone you may know. And so with the Small Business Resource Group, we have a dedicated staff, myself, right, that helps keep these connections happening of, oh, I see this is working here, or there's a need here, let me pull in this partner. So it's, you know, it again, also helps with funding, right? This because this is a lack. When we all come together, we can share that. Those resources. So I am the resource as far as like communication and getting the word out there, but I am, you know, part of a larger group. So I don't just advocate for one of our partners. I really try to match our partners with the needs or where I see they would be a great fit for different sectors in our community, whether that's families, you know, small businesses, when we go to vendors. I mean, there's a number of ways to get out. And so I fit that. So ideally, right, as we grow, this support for the different organizations and CDFIs would grow with us. But, you know, again, going back to that collaborative spirit, we come together and really help because we each have something that we do really well. And so we want to go ahead and single that out and help guide others to what you do really well as we grow and expand our services.
Anyone else want to jump in as we're running? Our time is coming to an end, but anyone else before we go into questions and answers?
I'll just add on, same direction. I think ultimately a cost-effective way to do some of these things would be really taking seriously the idea of community. Are your investors a community? Is your portfolio a community? Are your clients a community? And how can you facilitate those things? How can you become a platform for those things? Because if you can unlock the collective imagination and intelligence of the people you're already involved with in some way, right, whether it's a Facebook group or forum you create, then you'll get a lot further and you wouldn't have had to spend a lot of money. Because a lot of the times we don't need more information or more money, we need each other. And so that's something I'd encourage, just building off of what Norley had already added.
And David, if I can just make one comment also, I'll be brief, I apologize. It's just really, if we think about the CDFI's role in building and ensuring the success of businesses, I think it's also important that we think about succession planning, because the biggest benefit of investing in a small business is, one, the success of that business, but two, the business's ability to have a succession plan so there's not just one and done, but have some sense of longevity in the goal of that organization.
Well, we're gonna. I got one other question. I want. Wow, that's good. You're kind of scaring me. We're doing succession planning for us here, and that is so important. And we don't think ahead enough about succession planning and the growth, the layers of growth in a CDFI. We got about. We'll give everybody 30 seconds as we close out and go into Q&A. But how can we envision the funding of this work being revolutionized? Is there any kind of reimagination we can do about funding CDFIs? I know it's a big question. 30 seconds. What do you say, Misha?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of shared risk pools among CDFIs can be a way to really encourage us to take more risk and still protect our balance sheet.
Great. Norley.
So I think it's going back to what Johan was saying about keeping community, at the center of this, really how to best meet their needs, and really as far as funding, right? Like when we think of funding as these traditional methods that we've done, with whether it's grants, whether it's federal, local, state grants, how do we bring in our community, right? And really, what are our other options and help? But no matter what we're doing, as Johan mentioned, really it's the community that we're serving, right? That really has to be a center. So when we're reconsidering other options, we really have to include our community, their needs, their wants, their goals, and adjust, and then think outside the box, right? Like outside of what we've been doing as we're expanding, reconsidering the different funding methods that are out there. Do we consider cryptocurrency? Like how are we funding this outside of where we're thinking, right? As we're thinking ahead, growing. So we're here now, but really envisioning out there and never losing focus of the community.
Johan.
Yeah, my idea here would be that as far as the future, we are the future. And so we want to think about what that means. In terms of the people we're serving, how do CDFIs facilitate homegrown institutions, right? And I think that's getting groups to shift from being grassroots to being able to receive some of these funds and to partner more effectively with underground organizations that grow their capacity to receive these funds and spread that money. And then you can also think of homegrown from a statewide. In New York State, there's a CDFI fund that partners with individual CDFIs so that they're better able to advocate and get money. And so, there's ways of thinking about that at state level and a local level. But ultimately, you want to create these homegrown institutions that are we being the people served. If you're talking about Black people, immigrant people, indigenous people, and so on, and groups struggling and wrestling with racially motivated economic exclusion, how do you create the opportunity for them to create institutions in their community to receive these funds? I think that'll stretch it by default, but you can also do that at the state level.
I know, yeah, you're going state level and policy. Catalina, what do you think? How do we revolutionize funding?
I'm more like Johan. This is crystal ball, and this is just Catalina speaking. I know that the way that we fund many things in America, particularly education, for example, or healthcare, could all be kind of revamped, if you will. But I do think that one of the things that comes to my mind is really this notion of bottom-up approach. I think it's important, to Mika's point, that as we think about funding CDFIs, that there should be some kind of sweat equity, if you will, that's contributed. But also, it's hard to think, because I in higher education, we do have access to both foundation dollars through grants, and then that's private money, but then public dollars through the government funds. And I think that it's a great way if higher education could partner more with CDFIs to provide some funding, if you will, through the work that we do. Certainly would behoove, would be beneficial to both groups. But it's a tough question, and I'm not sure that I have an answer for you today. But I do think that if we are able to give citizens back more of their dollars that they spend on or have to spend into other systems, then those dollars could in turn be used to support CDFIs, because they in turn would bring the organizations to those communities to make them stronger and more viable communities.
Sounds like a great grassroots approach. Well, we are going to move into questions and answer any Q&A from the audience or those that are in attendance. Does anyone have any questions that you want to refer to our panelists for?
David, I think I see some questions in the Q&A chat box. So if you'd like, I could pick one and start with it, but as the
Yeah,
moderator.
yeah, because I can't, yeah, I'm not able to see them on my end, so that would be great.
Yeah, so someone asks, my sense is that if there's not a justification under CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, the bank is not enthusiastic to invest in our local CDFIs. What is another source of sustainable income for CDFIs? I would say, you know, for CFNE, we don't rely on banks for much of our investment capital at all. We have a strong individual investor program, which I think brings a lot of benefit. Individual investors are sticky, right? They stick with you for a long time. Their reporting requirements are less intense than banks, so it sort of streamlines the compliance work. And you know, we have, thinking about partnerships, we have strong relationships with a number of wealth management companies and other sort of aggregators of people who would invest in us, so that we can take investments from unaccredited and accredited investors. But I would encourage CDFIs to consider that as a capitalization route.
Well, there is a question I can see. It's like, how have, oh, this is a good one though. How have CDFIs adjusted or changed their offering in light of all the movements with racial and social justice in your communities? I'm here in Minneapolis, where George Floyd and that situation and the unrest has literally shifted CDFIs, and there's literally tens of millions of dollars that are flowing into organizations that may not have a track record in doing the work that some of us have been doing for decades. Anyone want to jump in on that one? What offerings or what has been adjusted in your community as a result to all of the social unrest? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've been on a path of trying to center racial and economic justice more and more over the past number of decades. It was in our most recent strategic plan that started in 2020. 2020 is when we were planning it. 21 is when it launched. And that's where we decided to invest in building out a technical assistance program. Before then, I think we were relying on partners, sort of ignoring the gaps in the TA system and just letting things fall where they may. And we realized that we can't wait for other folks to fill in those gaps. You know, we have the resources and the opportunity, and we need to step up. And so that's what gave us the opportunity to bring Johan on and develop a lot of the programs that he's been talking about.
I also want to add that I think CDFIs have always, you know, been more willing to be more invested in riskier projects, right? Like folks that are less lendable, but they really have stepped up in trying to de-risk them, right? So once they offering the technical assistance and really investing in the community and those who are not seen as lendable by other institutions. So this is just historically what they have done, right? And so as the environment has changed, they have just buckled down and continue to do on a grander scale what they have been doing, you know, all along. So, you know, bringing in the additional technical assistance and really risking these, you know, opportunities for folks, whether they're entrepreneurs or homeowners, right? They've really just continued to do and really gone in there deeper as the environment has changed. But this is what they've been doing all along, I think, in our community and the service that they provide to our communities.
That's good. I got one last question as we close out. We're 1 minute over, but I thought this was a good question. How do you balance the competitive aspect of seeking funds while making sure you still advocate for other groups for funds? How do you do that in such a competitive environment at times? Kathleen, I'll have you start in that area. You're in a smaller area of Georgia, suburban area of Georgia.
Right. So I think competition is actually good for the market, right? We could all agree, as entrepreneurs ourselves, social entrepreneurs, that there is really value in having some competition. And what that means is, if Albany Community Together was not doing such an amazing job, certainly that would spur the growth of competitors to be able to offer the kinds of services that may or may not. On the other hand, the beauty of competition as well is that it does again create this opportunity for CDFIs to leverage their comparative advantage among themselves. So when you have an Albany Community Together who's doing a stellar job since 2002, we can all recognize that a small town like Albany, Georgia could certainly benefit from an additional organization that is doing work like ACT, so that we can kind of create this multiplier effect. And so I think that competition is good in the sense that, again, it makes us all better in the end.
Normally, you have a much bigger footprint, it seems like, than some of us. Do you feel the same way about the competition?
Definitely, right? It really keeps us, motivated and keeping our best work up front. I do want to say that one organization can't be everything to all, right? And so it's recognizing that for some projects, certain CDFIs would be a better fit. When it's smaller loans, right, it's just not feasible for a larger CDFI to really manage all these smaller loans. They're not as effective, right? So it's being able to recognize who is a good fit for what, and just understanding that one organization, as they can do really great work, they just can't be everything to everyone, and recognizing and identifying the different partners that can be leveraged in certain, projects, and, that they would be a better fit than others.
Johan, same question as we close out now.
Yeah, for me, it depends on the source or the cause of the competition. Is it the case that things aren't working, and so we need a diversity of approaches, and that's why communities pop up these various programs? Or is it a case of, opportunism, where, there's some funding sources, and so, folks are throwing their hat in the ring and things like that, because, that's not helpful. I think what is helpful is an ecosystem approach, building off of what's been said, where you recognize in our area, what are all the resources needed, how many people we're trying to serve, and are we able to serve them? And that way you have one goal that reconciles everyone's interests. And so investors, service providers, clients can all recognize what the measurement is, right? There's 5,000 kids in our area. Having 3 or 5 after-school program that's serve 10 each is not competition. They'll try to paint it that way. We've got 1,000 kids on this, and so it's outrageous sometimes. But anyway, I think ecosystem approach is necessary, recognizing what are we trying to do together, and what can we all contribute towards getting us there.
Misha, and you can close us out, and we're going to move on to the next segment. But Misha, what are your thoughts on competition?
Yeah, I would just say really quickly that competitors can be collaborators when they're advocating for a bigger pie, right? So in Massachusetts, all of the CDFIs get together to advocate for more state money for CDFIs.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Great panel. Great panel. We're just going to give you one of these, but great panel, great discussion. Thank you so much for your time. And we're going to move into the next section. We're going to do a case study, I believe, on the Black Orlando Fund. So I'm going to turn this back over, I believe, to Madeline.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I can't thank you guys enough for speaking on this panel and lending your insight to this topic. And so we know that it takes a lot of work and line of sight from people in varying sectors. So again, thank you all for speaking. And so another component of this conversation is also around relationship building, trust building, and honestly troubleshooting. And so some of the questions we got as we were developing this session from our subcommittee members is essentially, how do these collaborations even come to be? What does the groundwork and foundation really look like for this? And so I'm going to introduce our next speakers for a little fireside chat about sort of the foundations of EBO. enterprise in Black or Latino. So I'm going to ask Dwayne Lewis from BBIF and Candace Simmons from Wells Fargo to go ahead and hop on camera. And I sort of want to frame this before y'all get into your conversation, essentially, as how did this collaboration come about, and what were you seeing from your seats that necessitated the creation of EBO? So I'll let y'all take it away.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Good to be here. Excited to have this conversation with Dwayne and try to share our lessons learned, our challenges, our ups and our downs as we are, I would like to say, still in the infancy stage of building this collaborative here in Orlando. So thank you for having us, Prosperity Now, who has been a partner since the beginning, which was, oh my God, two and a half years ago. And I know, Dwayne, you're going to talk a little bit about it. It goes way beyond 2 years ago. But I think I'll just start with like the first thing that has to happen in a community to even start the beginning conversations to build a collaborative is number one, you got to have someone bold enough and willing to just kind of acknowledge the lack of having that type of collaborative or partnership in your community. And sometimes that may come from the nonprofit leaders themselves. It may come from hearing from just your communities that you serve that says, hey, what's going on? In our case, it came from a funder. Working with Wells Fargo at the time, I'm still with Wells Fargo, but in a different role. But at the time, I worked for community relations. And so I manage our philanthropic giving and community development for Wells Fargo. And as a funder, serving multiple communities, multiple diverse groups, multiple nonprofits, I work, across the lines, not only with nonprofits, but community leaders and our faith leaders and our government and elected officials. And so as a funder, I can step outside and look in and see, wait, where's the voice when it's Black issues, right? Where's the representation when they're showing up and they're doing work? And in our case, our collaborative is very focused on strengthening Black-led, Black-serving nonprofits in Central Florida. And the first thing I just had to acknowledge was we just lacked full representation at the table, in the rooms, a part of the discussions. I heard a little bit from the last group, and you talk about that competition. Yeah, I could hear other funders say, well, why work with that group? We're already funding financial health for youth. And it's like, but we got 10,000, youth in Orange County. I doubt that one nonprofit is digging into all of those different districts. And so, yeah, I think you first just in the community got to get to a place where somebody acknowledges that this is missing. For us, because I was a funder, I think I was in a different space where, in addition to seeing the gap, I can kind of cherry pick, if I will, who was prime, who was ready, what organizations did it make sense, right? If we got 100 and some nonprofits, they may not all be on the same page at the same time, but for us in Orlando, we had 3 things in our favor. Number one, we had a new CEO at our Central Florida Urban League who had taken the Urban League that was, borderline about to close their doors and turned it into a well-built fiscal agent, community servant Urban League. Number 2, we had a new CEO at our Central Florida Chamber of Commerce, right? And the CEO there had just done an amazing job engaging and building relationship and trust with the community, with elected officials, with the business community. And so, powerhouse. And then lastly, we had a jewel in our backyard. We had a Black CDFI, which when people say, well, how did those 3? I always say, well, duh, when you got a Black CDFI, which, by the way, the CEO of that CDFI has been managing that organization for 35 years, it only made sense to start there. And I know, Dwayne, Dwayne, I'm gonna toss this one to you because you've been at BBIF, you've been in this community the longest. But the next thing I would say has to happen is once you acknowledge your community needs it, that especially among our Black nonprofits, sometimes there's a conversation that needs to happen before we start advancing the work. And that's in essence what we did first in 2019. But I mean, Dwayne, you knew, I think, why was it, what did it mean to us to start first with these three organizations and these leaders? And when we say organizations, we're not just talking about the leaders, we're talking about their staff, their board members. We started there, and we kind of had the talk before the talk. And I mean, for someone who, you know, been with the organization BBIF a long time, why do you think that was so critical to advancing enterprise in Black Orlando first?
Well, first, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me on this panel. And to start from, I guess, from our perspective as a practicing CDFI, we also recognize that there was a gap when it came to collaboration in our community. As you know, Candace, this is a pretty small, close-knit community, and we have very small circles that we all kind of run within. And I noticed very early on that there were three really well-represented organizations that focused on our community, but didn't always work together to help support our communities. And so I always wondered, well, why is it that we're all serving the same community, but we don't really come together to work together? And so what I found was that you had leaders within those organizations that had aspirations to come together, but they're also run by boards. And so because we're in a small, tight-knit community, a lot of the board members have certain history with each other, and things that were outside of our organizations kind of crept in and kind of kept us from being able to come together as we needed to really help support our communities the way that our communities really needed them. And so that was initially the challenge that we were having when we were trying to come to the table to come together as a collaborative. And thankfully, we had a funder who was kind of outside of that circle, who was able to come in and say, hey, look, we have some really good organizations here that are doing really good work in our communities. Why don't you guys work together to enhance what you guys are doing in our community? And so when Wells Fargo stepped in and brought the idea of bringing us together, it was like a godsend, because this was something that we've always strived for, but because of internal challenges, we weren't always able to bring it together. So really, it took that outside influence, so to say, to come in and say and acknowledge, one, that we had really good, strong organizations, but two, that there was just a lack of cohesion of coming together and partnering to do even more work to benefit our communities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I also, you know, one of the things I saw, the desire was there, right? We were not short of passion and commitment. And so as easy as it was for me to pull you all together, the first thing I realized, and this experience as a funder, being on the other side of the fence, has truly humbled my approach and my perspective to the work. Because one of the things I also realized in doing this is you have to have someone that's willing to be there and take that ownership and that accountability and that responsibility to keep the work connected. Because as nonprofits, as much of these three organizations were committed to the work, the reality is you all are running your own independent organizations. Your plate runneth over. with things to do. And so although, yes, everyone's hands were raised and they're in as thought leaders, that sometimes the day-to-day of it, you guys didn't have the capacity to take that on, which is why I would say, especially to strengthen these, you either got to find the people or the person that can take on this, or you need to be willing to pay for it. You need to be willing to offer up some of that initial, ground investment that can provide human personal capital to the fight. Because if not, exhaustion can definitely take over and become greater than the passion. For me, this work, it is not work, this is my purpose. And so, but a many a days, there's a lot I did for EBO that is nowhere in my job description for Wells Fargo. But it's because I take this work and I take each organization and each leader and every person connected to it personal. And so if you don't have that, funding in the beginning can help, because someone paid will have an accountability and a responsibility and a dedication to keep with the day-to-day,
And you're absolutely right. And I think that's part of the challenge that we all have as nonprofit organizations. We're all busy running our organizations. We're scrambling to gather resources for our communities, and it doesn't really allow for us to be able to really come together and putting a plan of action together that allows for all of us to be able to commit to a very specific strategy. And let's face it, capital is king. Just like our communities need it, our businesses need it, we also need it as well. And so it really required that type of investment. And I think that was a critical piece to this partnership, is bringing the investment in so that we could utilize those resources and slow down and come together. And so we didn't have to focus on, well, you know what, I've got to make sure that I'm able to take care of my responsibilities on this side. And so that's preventing me to come on the table to you on the other side. And so I think that was a really big piece to this whole partnership, was being able to get that capital, that funder who believed in the work that we're doing and the mission that we have to try to really help our communities.
And it's interesting you talk about capital, because I think that was the first time I got to experience, what it's like to be leading a nonprofit seeking funding. Like, we joke about it. I'm always able to make investments and advocate for investments internally. I've never really been on the other side that's trying to secure the funding. And what I realized is, although we know the power of this collaboration, I don't think I was as prepared to realize how much of a fight you're in for, right? Because you're trying to shift an entire ecosystem. I mean, let's think about it. A Black fund built to provide funding and capital and resources to Black-led, Black-serving nonprofits and local businesses, that shifts the economics of a community. And so whereas I thought it was like done in getting people's buy-in, I quickly realized we're going to need more at this table. And so I think leveraging your influence and your allies in your community is critical to building these. And so I had the advantage, being a funder, having an amazing partnership with the Central Florida Foundation, which had served as a community quarterback through initiatives like this in the past. I've seen it done when they tackled housing and homelessness. I've seen them when they do it when they tackled building community funds. I knew that they could be a bridge between our group and our business community, our government officials, because the conversations weren't, we weren't just closing deals. We weren't just, presenting, and folks were like, sign me up. And so making that introduction to the Central Florida Foundation was a game changer. And so I would encourage anyone, as you first identify your collaborators and you build that network and you understand what you can accomplish together, ask yourself who else is needed. And so they played a critical role in helping us knock down doors that we couldn't get down before, secure funding that, who would have thought our second funder would have been a hospital, but Florida Blue, came into this partnership with the foundation and the Wells Fargo Foundation. So you never know, through the power of allyship and relationships, what additional conversations could happen. And so, and through that, it allowed us to secure Prosperity Now, which would be another piece of advice I would tell anyone that's looking to do it, is don't do it alone. We knew we wanted to be very intentional. We didn't want to just try some things and hope they work. We want to be very intentional of building this right, because we feel like, the communities are expecting us to, right? They're expecting us to some degree get this thing right. And so creating partnerships and relationships with the amazing team at Prosperity Now has been extremely helpful. Even in moments where we felt like we felt like the wind got sucked out of us in the process, sometimes just to get validated in your work that you're not alone, this is completely normal and we can get around this, let's go back to the drawing board, is extremely, extremely helpful.
I think you've hit on an excellent point. As a CDFI, it's extremely critical that we're able to bring in funders, foundations to help our work, because the type of work that we're doing, it's not something where we're going to be able to support ourselves just based off of lending capital out to businesses. We know that our businesses need more than just capital. They talked a little bit earlier about technical assistance. Our community, our businesses, they need education. There's a lot of resources that they have not been able to access that we need to bear, and our funders play a critical role in being able to support that. And a big plus for this partnership is being able to bring in those type of funders. So we didn't really have access to these funders on our own. And I'm sure each of the partnering organizations would say, without this partnership, they would not have been able to access the funders that we have been able to together. And I think that's the power of being able to bring a partnership like this together, is that it allows for you to take all of the historical work that you've done as a single entity, combine it, bring it together, and now you're able to get the buy-in from funders that may not have been looking to fund these types of initiatives. Because I mean, let's face it, when you're talking about bringing that racial wealth gap closer, you don't have a whole rush of funders coming in to say, yes, let's go ahead and let's get this done. And so it's
Right.
really important that a collaborative come together to really highlight the need. You mentioned Prosperity Now. That's what they do. They show the disparities in communities. I mean, without that data, it's very hard to be able to make the case to a funder, hey, look, we need resources for this community. This community's been under-resourced for forever, and here's the data to support it. So this is why it's important that you contribute to this cause, because without it, these communities will never be able to move forward and prosper the way that we need them to. So I just wanted to make sure that the audience understands how powerful a collaborative can be to supporting not just your own organization, but your communities at large. In the last segment, they were talking about competition. And, competition can absolutely be healthy. But I think when you can come together as organizations and pool your resources, it attracts other folks to want to come in and help your cause. And I think this collaboration is a great showcase for that.
Absolutely. And I love how you talk about, because it grew, right? So when you're going to do a collaboration, what I would say is be flexible, be nimble. Where you start is nowhere where you end. And so what we thought initially was to just ground these three organizations and being more collaborative in 2019. You fast forward and in 2020, the murder of George Floyd happens. And we pull back up and have a whole different conversation of like, wait a second. This thing is bigger than these three organizations, and serving our community is bigger than just folks seeing us working better together, which is how the conversation of the fund itself really started to blossom. But I will also encourage you, and I think I heard a little bit of this on the last one, is be authentic, be very authentic to the work, and be intentional. And be strategic. This fund was not created just so we can go knock down doors and say, we got a Black fund and you need to be helping Black issues, so put in it. No, we are really taking the time to understand what are the impacts, what are the systemic issues, what are the gaps in our community, what is needed, who's doing it, and how are we going to strategically have informed investments, which means it takes time. Would I have liked this to be a multi-million-dollar fund 12 months ago? Absolutely. But it's 2022 and we're like halfway with, 2 steps of the 4 done. But we're building it right, and we're building it intentionally because we know we are all pulling up to build this for a community. And you want to build something that's sustainable for generations to come, not build something that will be lost when Candace retires or moves on from Wells Fargo, or be lost when Inez is no longer at BBIF. We have to think beyond building for us now, but building for the next generation. And so we think about that as we make very informed decisions around how we approach the work as a collaborative and our next steps. We do have a question. There's some coming up in the audience, so I'm gonna try to wear 2 hats for us, Dwayne. So the first question said, how can we connect with program officers or CRA officers at regional banks that have the same level of passion or forward thinking? Here's what, and I'll take that one because you guys challenged me. I also hosted and sponsored with partner with Wells Fargo last year a community conversation held just for Black-led, Black serving organizations. You would be surprised how many organizations, CEOs, and executive directors entered that room and had not even met each other. You're serving the same community, the same zip codes. You're offering some of the same complementary services and didn't know each other. I would say the first place to start is talking to each other, because you all have your own personal relationships with local funders in your market. And so you can share, who are the Dwaynes in your market? Who are the Candaces in your market? Share and be willing to have that conversation with them. Glenn Gilzine, the CEO of Central Florida Urban League, took me out to lunch and said, Candace, you're a funder. You can challenge us to have a conversation. You can ask us, you can support us totally different. And because you are supportive of all of these organizations, they're going to listen. And so I just think I would say start with your own personal network. Who are you working with as a funder or community ally that right now today, they show up a little bit differently than maybe others. They've already done some out of the box thinking. They've already supported you beyond just dollars. Sometimes it starts with just a conversation. And if you don't have, then ask some of your peers to see, do they have relationships with those in the community that already has an appetite for it, and they just may don't know the first thing to do. And it's okay if you don't know the first step. If you just find the people with the passion, then collectively together, you guys can talk about and create what that first step looks like.
Yeah,
Dwayne, I'll
excellent,
give you the
excellent.
next question because it looks like it's directly to CDFI.
Well,
Oh,
hold on. Let me just kind of add on to what you just said,
okay.
because that's actually great. Two things I will say. If you already have relationships with banks, ask those individuals who are the CRA officers, who are the program officers within those institutions. They will absolutely connect you, and they're always great resources. One other one also that I found effective for our organization is going to bankers meetings. A lot of times when I'll just say myself, when I've attended those meetings, they give you time to introduce yourself, talk about your organization. And from there, a lot of bankers reach out to you and say, hey, you know what, didn't realize that you were in our community and you did what you do. And they're able to also connect you with CRA folks and program officers within those institutions, and that helps to expand your network as well. So just wanted to chime in on that.
Great add, Dwayne. I know we have 3 minutes left. We have one more question, but as you were speaking, I thought about an additional response. Start with funders who are funding you. So many times we kind of get on the merry-go-round of the grant making. You submit the grant, you get it approved, it's programmatic, you make it happen, you give your impact reports. Oftentimes you're not really coming back and having those conversations with your funders and saying, this isn't working and this is why. And so if they're already funding you and funding your organization, that means they see the value in what you're doing in the community. Share this gap. Say, hey, it's great you're funding this, but let me talk to you about this. Let me tell you what's challenging and what's needed. Because you may find that and I think sometimes we're fearful to have that yes and conversation because we don't want to feel like we're going to lose funding here to go here. And that isn't always the case. Like there's a way to continue supporting your organizations, but then advocate for something bigger at the table. Okay, so let me go up, Dwayne. Let's see. The question was for CDFIs. What are CDFIs doing to change the narrative that investing in businesses of color are riskier than majority firms?
I see research, data, etc. Well, I'll give you a number. Through our 35 plus years existence, we have had a 4% loan loss rate. In the banking world, that is an excellent, excellent number. So what that says and what that tells us is our businesses of color are not any more riskier than any other businesses. A lot of times it's the way you structure your loans. It's the relationships that you develop. And it's also being able to provide them with resources outside of just lending, like technical assistance, being engaged with them, supporting them, helping them. And what you'll find is that they're no different than any other business owner out there or any other entrepreneur. And so that's how you kind of debunk that fallacy that they are more risky, and making sure that you're keeping that data and you're showing your funders that data. That helps to support and debunk the claim. That helps to debunk the claim that they're more riskier.
Nice closing. Ground your work in data and build your storytelling around it to reshape those narratives. That's our time. We really do appreciate Prosperity Now offering us this stage. I'm sure Dwayne agrees with me. You know, LinkedIn us, find us. You have questions. We're always willing to connect with others and sharing this experience of supporting our communities in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Candace and Dwayne, and thank you to this panel. This has been absolutely phenomenal. And of course, Prosperity Now, thank you so much for your galvanization of this work. And I would be amiss if I did not give a huge thank you to Kaiser for their support. And at this time, we will be moving forward to the best and worst part of the day. We've had a great panel. We've digested some really amazing information, but we want to make sure we're doing a little bit of a share out and a closing. We want to open up the floor. We want to make sure any other questions can be asked. And we want to give everyone an opportunity to really hear from us as a panel and as a group. And I am more than happy to be able to extend that invitation. And I'll let Tracy extend that invitation out to everyone as well, who I love partnering with, by the way, just for the record.
I'm still on mute. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Brian. This today was awesome. The information that our panelists shared was just awesome, and I'm sure that, we had questions, coming in, but as we went along, more and more questions started popping up with everyone, I'm sure, because I did. But I heard a lot of some things that were common in the conversations, and I'll just quickly just highlight what I heard. I heard that for some smaller CDFIs, there's just not a lot of interest income to help sustain us. So we need that funding from other agencies and organizations to help us power through our missions. I heard a lot about opportunities to identify what those resources are and who those ecosystem partners could be. And then I heard that, be intentional about effective partnering. And look for collaborative partnership, especially around coaching and mentorship for, the missions that we're trying to do. So that's my quick share out. So I'll open it up for the panel or for our guests, our attendees to kind of share out what your highlights and what your key takeaways from today was. I would love to hear from you all. So if you want to take yourself off of mute, or you can type it into the chat, and I'll share those with Brian and the rest of our panel.
And as we're looking for any last closing share outs or highlights from this amazing session, I just want to aim to kind of recap on some of the framing questions and how they were addressed. We really did talk about leveraging those relationships for the capital side from public and private partners. Use the people that you're connected with. You never know what other people they may be able to point you in the right direction with. And we heard some really good stuff around coaching. How many collaboratives are we a part of that we know who does what work? I mean, we have to do that work, or that's where we're missing a lot of support opportunities. But it all circled around community development cohesion, and to see that work being done by so many of our fellow CDFIs and community development organizers is exciting. And the fact that we can all continue to do this work more effectively together is something that we truly look forward to. And so at this time, I'll definitely make sure that we thank you all for being a part of such an amazing panel. And we'll be on the lookout for any other last minute highlights or comments into our chat. But really just want to appreciate the coordination and the leadership of all parties involved. And at this time, we will graciously pass it back to our host, Prosperity Now. Thank you all so much. And we're really looking forward to continuing to partner with each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Brian and Tracy. I really appreciate it. So we have reached the end of this session. I really want to extend my thanks to all of our panelists, our fireside chat the participants of this program who have helped shape this conversation that we just had today. And I want to sort of remind you that we will be continuing this conversation. We know it sort of takes a multi-pronged approach to really get to the root cause of racial economic inequality and sort of broaden opportunities for communities of color. So again, we appreciate your interest in this session and want to invite you all to keep the ball rolling next week. We have our next session November 7th around policy and advocacy, and then again on November 9th, wrapping up around funding and investments. But once again, I want to thank everyone for their interest and their time, and we will go ahead and close it out. Thank you.